Hello and welcome to the first Commander video from Magic Boy Productions. I am Ben, aka Magic Boy on Magic the Gathering Online, and today we are going to be going on a Ravenous Ride with the Gitrog. This is a brand new channel, and so I am learning all of the video editing, sound editing, etc. as I go, so look forward to improvements as the channel goes on. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share so that the channel can grow and you can find further content. This video is going to feature a deck overview, 2 gameplay videos with commentary, and then some final thoughts on the deck. How did it perform? What might we want to change? Without further ado, let's jump right into the deck. The Gitrog Ravenous Ride is a 5-mana 6/5 with Trample and Haste and Golgari colors. When it deals combat damage to a player, you can sacrifice a creature that saddled it. If you do, draw X cards and then put up to X lands from your hand onto the battlefield tap, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So we want to be having creatures with reasonable power, sacrificing them, drawing a bunch of cards, and setting up for each turn to be bigger than the last, essentially. It's less of an incremental increase than an exponential increase, usually. There are a few different ways to build this deck. Landfall is an option, since the Gitrog can put a ton of lands into play in one shot. You can also play with creatures that have high power but low mana costs, like Rotting Regisaur, getting the most bang for your buck in the terms of the most power for mana. I opted to go with creatures with death triggers. I wanted to play creatures that have an overall reasonable impact on the board. They've got like good power and toughness for their mana cost. They have some reasonable effects. And that way we get additional value, and we also have a game plan for if the Gitrog isn't available to us for some reason, if it's been imprisoned in the moon or just pinpoint removed enough times that we can't quite catch up on it with mana. That's one of the worries of this deck, is if the Gitrog gets removed before you get to connect with it, you often are going to start to fall behind. This is a bracket 3 deck, and so we're going to start off by looking at our game changers. We do have Ancient Tomb, and this is a land that taps for 2 colorless mana, but deals you 2 damage, so you're paying life for mana essentially. In a deck with so many expensive spells, you're going to get a lot of value out of having some free mana acceleration. The Gitrog coming down on turn 4 versus turn 5, or any of our big creatures hitting the board just a little bit early. We also have Demonic Tutor and Vampiric Tutor. I was looking at the Game Changers list and there wasn't anything that really called out to me, and so I decided to try the tutors since this deck has a lot of different pieces and it could be useful to find exactly what we need at a given moment. So we're going to try those out today. Our mana base is 37 lands. It's got a good amount of utility in it. You can usually get away with that with a 2-color deck. We have some Channel Lands, some MDFCs, we have Bajuka Bog, we have Cabal Coffers and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. So there's a lot going on in the mana base. I will note that 3 of our MDFCs really play into the plan of this deck: Balagate Recovery, getting stuff out of the graveyard; Disciple of Freyly, sacrificing creatures to draw cards; Malakir Rebirth, bringing things back once they've been sacrificed. We have several of those effects. Moving on to the protection category: Not Dead After All, Supernatural Stamina. They all do a sort of similar thing where you'll cast this on a creature that you plan to sacrifice, and then it will come back for free. So it's a great way to double up on those creatures. We have a pretty robust ramp package. A lot of them are cards that you would expect, like Farseek, Nature's Lore, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach. Aside from those really staple utility spells, the idea here is that these are reasonably sized creatures that will also be able to be sacrificed to the Gitrog monster. Something like Dance of the Tumbleweeds in the late game can grab us a land and leave behind a body, or if we don't feel like we need a land, it can just get a body for us. Same with Beanstalk Giant. You cast it on turn 3, and then again on turn 7, and get some mileage out of both sides of that. Since we're putting creatures into the graveyard, we do have a small recursion package in the form of Animate Dead, Reanimate, and the spicier Journey to Eternity. Our overall removal package for this deck isn't incredibly in-depth. We do try to jam some creatures in here so that we have things like Kogla and Noxious Gearhulk that can deal with problem creatures, but then also be sacrificed to the Gitrog. We do have a few more efficient options like Assassin's Trophy, Force of Vigor, and Terra Sunder as well. We have 5 sweepers. One of them, Bane of Progress, can be a pretty sizable creature to sacrifice while it deals with all artifacts and enchantments. Mandate of Abaddon and Toxic Deluge are both wraths that have potential to be fairly one-sided for us. Our board is likely to be bigger than most opponents' boards, and when we can cast those spells to full effect, it will often clear the board for everyone else while leaving ours intact. Damnation is really just a great rate for when you really just need to clear the board if someone else gets ahead of you. And Massacre Worm is kind of not really, I wouldn't really classify this as a sweeper. I put it here because it didn't fit quite anywhere else. Because the Gitrog monster draws so many cards, we don't have a lot of dedicated card draw, but the ones we do are really fantastic. Greater Good is almost a backup commander, allowing us to sacrifice creatures to draw cards equal to their power and then discard 3 cards. Last March of the Ents can draw us a ton of cards based on the size of our creature and then put a lot of creatures into play. And Outcaster Trailblazer is a bit of a 1-card combo with the Gitrog. You'll get to see this in one of the games, but it's essentially you plot it on turn 3, cast it on turn 4. That gives you enough to play the Gitrog as long as you have a land drop, and you go from there. Last and certainly not least are some cards I'm labeling Synergy. These are cards that don't necessarily have death triggers or fit into any other category very well, but they do work really well with the Gitrog. Genji Glove can get us extra combat steps. Galta is, if we're gonna fill our hand, Galta lets us put it on the board. Jared is a bit of a backup commander. Mikaeus the Unhallowed allows us to sacrifice creatures and have them come back. Rush to Birth lets us sacrifice creatures and get value out of it. Sheoldred can gain us a ton of life when we're drawing 10 or 12 cards a turn. Surik and Goreclaw can let these big creatures come down hasty. Skullspore Nexus can allow us to retain our board presence even as we're sacrificing things. And Unnatural Growth and Zapandrel allow us to increase the overall power and toughness. That makes them bigger for the Gitrog to sacrifice. It makes the Gitrog bigger as well, so it's more likely to trample through for damage. And even without those synergies, these cards can be overwhelming when you have a bigger board than your opponent, so you just start slamming your creatures into them, and there's often not much they can do about it if they are not properly set up to defend. That's going to do it for the deck tech. Let's head into game number 1. Winning Hand has a single colorless source and isn't going to let us do much, so we're going to go ahead and ship it. Our second hand has 3 lands, an Outcaster Trailblazer, and some plays for later, which is fantastic. Our first opponent today is Golbez, Crystal Collector. This Final Fantasy Dimir commander, both in mana cost and color identity, deals with artifacts. It's a pretty new card, so I'm not sure exactly what to expect, but artifact decks are always heavy in terms of their threat index for me. Next up we have another Dimir commander, John Arenicus Shattered One. This is a commander that can be built in many ways, but I'm expecting some big creatures with downsides to hit the field and be donated to John Arenicus' opponents so that they can attack each other and create chaos. Mabel, Heir to Crackflame, is a Boros Equipment commander. I'm not sure if she's planning to go tall with equipment or wide with mice, maybe some kind of mix of both, but we'll find out. Golbez starts things off with a tap swamp. John Arenicus has an island and a ghost vacuum, which is actually pretty annoying considering we have a graveyards on theme. Mabel plays a plains and uses that to cast the first of what is sure to be many equipment that they've cast, Zephyr Boots. We don't have much going on, so we just play tap Bala, get recovery and pass. Buried Ruin is the land for Golbez. They're gonna tap out and pass. John Arenicus has a Drowned Catacomb, and then a play for the turn in the form of a Baleful Strix. The little bird is going to enter the battlefield and draw them a card, and then be a fantastic blocker. Mabel has a mountain and passes to us. We're in similar straits. We don't have much going on yet, so we just play a forest and pass. Tapping out from MTGO value. Treasure Vault is the land for the Golbez player. They're going to use that to cast Foundry Inspector. This is an artifact creature that gives them an artifact cost reduction. John Arenicus has a island and a Despotic Scepter. Don't leave home without it if you're donating permanents to opponents. Mabel has a mountain, and that is going to let them cast their commander. The Mouse Soldier comes down and creates a Cragflame Legendary Equipment token, which is super cool. We have a forest for our turn, which is going to let us plot our Outcaster Trailblazer. That exiles it so we can cast it for free later, which is going to be a great setup play for us. The Golbez player has a Mikokoro as their land for turn. They're going to play a Cloud Key, doubling up on their artifact mana reduction, and that gets them a free Liquimetal Torque. They use their mana to activate Mikokoro, drawing everyone a card and maybe buying them some goodwill, despite the fact that they're clearly the threat here. Reliquary Tower is the land for John Arenicus, and that's going to let them cast their commander. Baleful Strix is going to get frisky, heading into combat to deal a mighty 1 damage to the Golbez player. And then at end step, John Arenicus is going to put 2 counters on the Baleful Strix, teach it how to never be sacrificed, and goad it for eternity before turning it over to the Golbez player. Mabel has an Arden Intrepid Archaeologist off their new mountain. They immediately go to combat, but the player kind of messes up the triggers or something here. I'm not sure, maybe it's a misclick. and they're not quite able to suit up Mabel appropriately, so they just pass back to us. We are in position now to cast our free Outcaster Trailblazer and get a mana off its ETB trigger. With our Woodland Cemetery, that's enough mana to cast our commander. This is the Gitrog, Ravenous Ride, and Outcaster Trailblazer is just such a perfect setup for this card. We get a trigger to draw a card when it enters, we saddle up the Trailblazer, and then swing with the Gitrog monster at the Golbez player, dealing 6, and because of the 4 power on Trailblazer, we get to draw 4 cards and put 4 lands into play tapped. This is going to put us over the maximum hand size, so we do have to discard a Farseek to turn, but it's not the worst. We've got plenty going on. Golbez untaps with double cost reduction and plays a Karn Bastion. Seems like they maybe don't have enough mana yet, I guess, because their play for the turn is a kicked Skyclave Relic, which is going to get them 2 copies of their indestructible mana rock. With the leftover mana that they have, they activate Mikokora again, drawing everyone a card. John Irenicus demands that the Baleful Strix attacks, and so it swings at us, drawing John a card and dealing us 3 damage. Not too worrisome. John Irenicus untaps. They have a swamp for their turn, which is going to let them cast a Shadowborn Demon, no apostles in sight, and its ETB trigger is going to destroy the Gitrog monster. We're going to send Gitrog to the command zone, and that's fine by us. And at end of turn, we get a Shadowborn Demon for our trouble, which is great. Mabel has a very classic play in the form of Sword of Fire and Ice. They're going to flawlessly execute their Arden trigger this time, putting all their equipment on Mabel. And Mabel comes swinging at us. We are the threat here, so we're going to take 6. They're going to get a loot with their Zephyr Boots. They're going to get a trigger of Sword of Fire and Ice to kill the Foundry Inspector and draw a card. We untap, and on our upkeep, Shadowborn Demon tries to sacrifice itself, but it can't because of John Irenicus, which is fantastic, because that's going to go really, really well with the Last March of the Ents that's in our hand. That's going to let us draw 8 cards for the Demon's Toughness, and then put any number of creatures from our hand onto the battlefield. We're going to put all of them in, which is a total of 8. We get a ton of triggers off Vaultborn Tyrant. We're going to get to fight Arden with Kogla, and we're going to get to destroy 3 permanents with Terastodon. I should have targeted Ghost Vacuum instead of Despotic Scepter here, but I was a little worried about some kind of weird thing they might be able to do with that card. Shadowborn Demon has to go to combat because it's goated. We swing it at the Golbez player, drawing John a card, and they're going to take 7. We are going to have to discard quite a few great cards to hand size, but we've still got 7 in hand. Academy Ruins is the land for the Golbez player, and they're going to spend a ton of mana to try to kick Rite of Replication our Ancient Admontoise, which isn't going to work. Baleful Strix swings in at Mabel this time, drawing John another card, and that deals 3 to Mabel. John Irenicus has a great answer to our giant board in the form of Reigns of Power, which means that it's their giant board, and they swing out at us, getting a ton of John Irenicus triggers. We are going to block with the meager board that we have been provided. It's going to be a lot of damage coming through, but it will at least kill their John Irenicus and their Beast token. But yeah, all told, we take 48 damage, and they're not done yet. Go for the Throat targets our Protean Hulk, and the death trigger is going to get them a Plague Reaver, which gets them a Vaultborn Tyrant trigger, and Plague Reaver at their end step will sacrifice this entire board. This is going to get them 10 treasures, a Construct token, and a Vaultborn Tyrant copy, along with some corresponding triggers. Mabel has decided they need our help, probably. They cast Minimum Containment targeting Plague Reaver. John Irenicus is going to discard 2 cards and sacrifice the Plague Reaver, which creates a delayed trigger, donating it to Mabel on their next upkeep. Mabel elects to hang back, letting us live. We crack our Polluted Delta for a Underground Mortuary and surveil a Nature's Lore into our graveyard. We play a Bayou for turn, which is going to come back to haunt us. I go ahead and cast Animate Dead, targeting my Ulenwald Hydra. I'm trying to bait out the Ghost Vacuum activation, but they just instead exile our Ancient Admontoise, which is interesting. Maybe it's a misclick, but we get a Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, out of our library. And with that, we're like, oh wow, great, let's Demonic Tutor. That'll let us go and get Cabal Coffers. Cabal Coffers goes great with Urborg. But the problem here is that we've already made our land drop for the turn. So we go with plan B and cast a Soul Ring. That's going to give us enough mana to tap out and cast a Cultivator Colossus. This is a star with power equal to the number of lands you control, that when it enters, you get to put a land into play and draw a card. and repeat that process. We get to put 7 lands into play and draw 7 cards. Pretty fantastic, especially because one of those lands is a reliquary tower, which means we no longer need to worry about that restrictive hand size. We have to attack with our goaded Shadow Demon. At this point, it's kind of like us against John Arenicus, so I don't really want to hit anyone. And I swing at Mabel, and that ends up being the best possible outcome because they have Celestial Armor. This is an equipment that when it enters, it attaches to Mabel. It's going to make her hexproof and indestructible, and she's now going to be able to block down that Shadowborn Demon, which is going to start chipping away at John Arenicus's engine. Drowned Catacombs comes down from the Golbez player, and they tap a bunch of mana. I hope that they're on the John Arenicus threat plan, but it ends up they have a big Myriad Construct 2020 thanks to all of our lands. They swing the Baleful Strix into Mabel. Mabel ably swaps it right out of the air. She is done with the shenanigans of John Arenicus, it seems. Homeward Path comes down from John Arenicus. They're going to sack some treasures, tap some lands to replay their commander. They follow that up with a Curse of Verbosity, enchanting the Golbez player. And then they play a Drinker of Sorrows, another creature with a downside. That's going to get them a Vaultborn trigger. They swing their construct into Golbez's construct to basically just to draw a card. And then at end of turn, they donate Drinker to Mabel. On their upkeep, Mabel gets their own Plaguereaver, woohoo. And they're going to cut a deal with the rest of the table, letting each of us draw a card while they draw 3. They discard 2 of those fresh cards to sack Plaguereaver and send it back to John Arenicus. And then they have a Hammer of Nazan for the turn. The hammer is going to come down, equipped to Mabel, and she swings Mabel at John Arenicus. They swing Drinker of Sorrow at us, we block, and John takes 10, and Mabel gets some triggers. We go into our big turn here, and I think John Arenicus definitely has a counterspell, so I'm trying to bait it out. I cast a Greater Good, I cast a Surk and Goreclaw, and it ends up being the spell that I really want to cast, Galta Stampede Tyrant, that does draw out the Arcane Denial. Good threat assessment from them. We still have plenty of mana, so we cast Gitrog, Ravenous Ride. It gets a Sork and Goreclaw trigger. We cast Shieldred. She also gets haste and a +1/+1 counter, and then we tear asunder the Vaultborn token. My plan here was to swing out and kill John Arenicus, but I decided to slow my roll. I rush rebirth the Colossus and then saddle up the Gitrog, and I want to leave back some blockers in case someone has some interaction here. So I swing with Gitrog, but all is clear. We deal 7 and get to sacrifice our creature, drawing a bunch of cards, putting a bunch of lands into play, getting a ton of Shieldred triggers. The Rush Rebirth grabs Mid-Chaos, giving us some board wipe insulation, and we're in great shape. On the next upkeep, John and I draw from Arcane Denial. Shieldred punishes them for their card draw and gives us some life for ours. Mistvault Bridge comes down from the Golbez player, and they cast a very painful Read the Bones thanks to Shieldred, and follow up with a combo piece in the form of Phyrexian Altar. John Arenicus ghost vacuums our Massacre Worm at the end of our turn. Maybe they have a plan there. Plaguereaver comes back on their upkeep, and Shieldred deals them 2 on their draw step. They switcheroo, switching our Uvenwald Hydra and an Elephant. It turns out what they're looking to do is get cards out of their hand. They also do that by discarding the Plaguereaver, and then they play a Windfall. And I'm a little bit worried about getting decked out here, so I play my Not Dead After All to reduce my hand size. But then we see all the Shieldred triggers go onto the stack, and it turns out that I have won the game thanks to that Windfall. So thanks.
Before we get into the actual gameplay, I want to talk about how this is a very interesting game in terms of highlighting the difference between playing Magic Online and playing table Magic. The Windfall likely would not have ever happened in a game of table. Someone would have said, I'm going to cast Windfall, or talked about casting Windfall, and people would have been like, oh no, there's a Shieldred, don't do that. And so maybe someone would have an answer to Shieldred. In this example, the John Arenicus player could have tried switcherooing my Shieldred beforehand. I had a sacrifice outlet, so that wouldn't have worked very well in this particular instance, but that probably would not have played out the way that it did in paper. And online, the moment you put a spell on the stack, it's on the stack. There's no taking it back. You can take back some things like adding mana to your mana pool, but once something has hit the stack and then the triggers start happening and you are in. And so I think it's interesting to note that. And when you're playing on Magic Online, it does pay to take a little moment and really think through, take a look at the board state, see what might happen, because there's no takesies backsies, essentially. And I actually like that in a way. I do enjoy the politicking and the discussion at a paper table, but it's a change of pace to have to really do your politics through action and really understand what's going on in the game. all that being said, talking about the gameplay, this is a pretty entertaining game, and I felt like there was some interesting stuff going on for most of the players. John Arenicus obviously got us real good with that Reigns of Power. They did hand the game to us at the end, but I'm pretty confident we would have won the game at that point anyways, even if Windfall had not happened. We were just really far ahead at that point. Gaining all that life back, we were no longer in a vulnerable position. The deck was really interesting. I'm actually really excited to build John Arenicus someday. I have some ideas about how I do it. It would be different, maybe not very different, but different from the deck that we saw. I want to give a shout out to the Mabel player because I felt like they made a very savvy political choice in switching gears when John Arenicus sort of obliterated my board and left me at a low life total. Instead of just finishing me off, which a lot of players would do because you see an opening and you take it, they started working on John Arenicus with their removal spell, and they left me alive. And I'm sure the thought process was, well, this person is going to untap and throw everything they can at John Arenicus. John Arenicus will probably kill them, or if they don't, I can do it pretty easily with my equipment-based commander. And it just so happened that we were able to rebuild almost instantaneously, and then the next turn gain enough life to be pretty insulated from reprisal. But I do think that was an excellent and shrewd decision from the Mabel player, and I felt that they had a persistent impact on the game. The Golbez player, I'm not really sure what they were up to. They never cast their commander, but it seemed like they were going for some kind of big Rube Goldberg combo, maybe making a bunch of artifact tokens off the construct or other sources, and then surveilling with Golbez and sacrificing them to Phyrexian Altar. They did have a really unfortunate interaction with the ward in that game that sort of held them back, but otherwise they actually mostly just ramped a bit and were a target for John Arenicus to do some things. So unfortunate we didn't get to see more out of Golbez, but happy to have them there. In terms of how our deck played out, it worked out really well. We got to see the Outcaster Trailblazer in action, and I really find that to be just like a card you can't ever cut from Gitrog Ravenous Ride. It's almost, to me, fundamental to the deck because it's essentially a one-card combo with the command zone. It's not going to win you the game, but it's just going to put you in such an excellent position. If you have a ramp source early, can plot this on turn 3, Gitrog sacrifice it on turn 4, that is an incredible start in a bracket 3 scenario, and you're going to do very well in games like those. And even in games like ours, where we didn't do anything but that until turn 4, we still were in a commanding position. Obviously, I want to give a little shout out to Shieldred. That life gain is really impressive, and it made me think that this deck might want a little bit more life gain worked into it. You are often going to be the primary threat, and so being able to defend your life total while still applying pressure would be really helpful, but we can get into some of that in the final thoughts. Let's go ahead into game 2. We were silly gooses and forgot to capture our opening hand, but our second 7 is something we're going to have to ship back. There's only 2 lands, there's not really anything to do. We can definitely do better with 6. Our mulligan to 6 is better, but not by much. We do have an Ancient Tomb, which is going to let us accelerate into whatever it is that we do find, but there's not really a lot going on. We're going to go ahead and put Bane of Progress on the bottom of our deck and see who we're up against. Our first opponent is Danitha, Benalia's Hope. This mono white commander likes to cheat big aura and equipment from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield and attach them for free to Danitha. So this is going to go tall rather than going wide. Up next is Tifa, Martial Artist, a Naya 4/4 with melee, which gives it +1/+1 for each opponent who's being attacked when it attacks, and you can get extra combat steps as long as a creature with power 7 or greater is attacking a player. We're expecting this to go both wide and big to get the most out of its abilities. Last but not least is Cloud, Midgar Mercenary, another mono-white equipment commander. Cloud gets to search for equipment, and then any equipment that's equipped to Cloud will trigger twice whenever it triggers. I'm expecting to see a lot of Swords of X and Y out of this deck and other equipments with great triggers, usually when they connect with combat damage. None of these decks really have an incredible threat profile to me, so it feels like we're starting out on even footing. Our deck might even be viewed as the most powerful out the gate. Our first draw is a Windswept Heath, which is fantastic because we're going to get to play that and then crack it. That's going to find us an Underground Mortuary, which lets us surveil. We put Undying Malice in our graveyard because that is not what we're looking for.
Danitha has a Plains, they pass. Tifa has an Elvish Mystic off their forest, and Cloud has a tapped Emiria the Sky Ruins, and then a Mox Opal, which is a powerful magic card. We play a forest and passed. Danitha plays a Plains and passes. There's a Thornspire Verge from Tifa who passes. Cloud has a Plains, and that lets them cast their commander. The Midgard Mercenary will enter the battlefield, searching up a Blackblade Reforged. On our turn, we still don't really have anything to do, so we just play out our Bayou and pass. Danitha has a Loyal Warhound, and because we have 3 lands, that fetches them up a Plains tap. They play a Plains untapped and pass. Tifa has a Mountain, and that's going to let them cast their Monster Manual. That's a pretty threatening card. Who knows what's in their hand? Sword of the Anime comes down for Cloud, and they pass back to us. We're going to play our Ancient Tomb and take 2 damage to cast the Gitrog Ravenous Ride in defense mode. I just don't want to take opportunistic damage from these creatures on the board. Danitha has their 5th Plains, and that allows her to come down, and she gets herself an Argentum Armor, which is the kids say is a problem. Tifa just plays a Mountain and passes with their Monster Manual up. Cloud has a Plains and equips their Sword of the Anime to Cloud, and then swings into the open Monster Manual. They do get their double sword triggers, which is cool, but Tifa has a Blightsteel Colossus. So Cloud is going to get blocked into oblivion by the poisonous monster. They follow up with Endless Atlas, which isn't a blocker. Like, I would have just held up mana there to have threat of removal. And yeah, the Blightsteel Colossus has changed our plan. We were going to Kogla and fight something and sack it to get Gitrog Monster, but that would leave us without blockers. And so instead, I'm going to cast Disciple of Freyles. I'm going to sacrifice the Gitrog Monster, draw 6 cards, gain 6 life for options for future turns, but most importantly, leave behind 3 toughness. That means that the Blightsteel Colossus can't kill us without interaction, and there's a softer target on the board, so we're hoping that that's what they'll do. They do have a collective resistance for the Argentum Armor, which is great. We'll discard some cards and pass. Armored Sky Hunter comes down, and Danitha attacks us, chipping in for some commander damage. They play out their own Emiria. Tifa swings with Blightsteel and takes the Cloud player out of the game. They're going to follow that up with a Disciple of Freyles of their own, but Danitha doesn't want them drawing 11 cards, so they path to exile the Blightsteel Colossus, and Disciple just doesn't do much. We are not in a position yet to do anything big, and so I opt to cast Topiary Stomper. That's going to get us a forest out of our library, and now we can hold up Rush Rebirth on a blocker for some value. Gives us a little bit of defensive utility. Danitha has another Plains. They cast Extra Planar Lens, exiling a Snow-Covered Plains and making all their others tap for double mana. They use that double mana to cast Halvar, who gives all equipped creatures double strike, and then a Solemn Simulacrum, getting some value in the form of a land that enters the battlefield. They swing out at the Tifa player, and Armored Sky Hunter is going to grab the Aether Spark and equip it to Danitha. The Aether Spark triggers twice because of double strike and gets a ton of counters. They take a big hit, and they're going to use some counters to draw some cards. Nature's Claim takes out that source of card advantage, the Aether Spark, and then with their Plains, they're able to cast Tifa. On our turn, we are going to cast Kogla. Kogla's going to fight that Armored Sky Hunter again. We're going to attack the card advantage rather than anything else. Danitha comes at us, and this time we do get to run our play where we block with Disciple of Freyles and cast Rush Rebirth. That means that when Disciple of Freyles dies, we're going to search our library for a creature with lesser mana value. We don't have any incredible options here, and so I want more mana, and I grab Gwenna. Speaking of more mana, Danitha has a Marble Diamond and then a Mistveil Plains. Tifa untaps and passes back to us. We play Command Beacon and then Zapandrel, and because that only has 4 power, it doesn't untap Gwenna, so kind of bad sequencing on our part. Zapandrel is going to make our board big, and we swing Kogla at the Danitha player. It takes out Extra Planar Land. Topiary Stomper is going to chip in some damage at Tifa. The Solemn Simulacrum blocks and dies, drawing them a card. And we're going to Balagad Recovery back our Rush Rebirth so that we have some defensive utility. Emiria brings back Solemn on their upkeep, and then Commander's Plate comes down. That makes it so that Danitha cannot be blocked or interacted with in any way, which is really scary. And so we get our combat triggers, and Danitha deals 14 commander damage to us, taking us up to 18. Tifa has some mana dorks in the form of Boreal Druid and Birds of Paradise. They go to combat, and with the triggers on the stack, Swords of Plowshares Danitha, which that's fine by us. On our turn, we cast a Soul Ring. We're then going to use some mana from Gwenna to help us cast a Protean Hulk, and because that has 5 or more power, it'll untap Gwenna and put a counter on her. And then we're going to cast the Gitrog Ravenous Ride, again untapping Gwenna.
I unfortunately do a boo-boo here and don't realize I can't saddle at instant speed, so I go to combat, and oh well, my board's big at least, so I swing out at Danitha. The Kogla is going to take out the commander's plate, and I'm actually hoping that they'll block with Solemn here. Since they returned that instead of Armored Skyhunter with Emiria, I'm hoping they'll do it again. We get a big hit in, and then Emiria does bring back Solemn. I like that better than Armored Skyhunter. That's a much scarier card. But Danith has an incredible top deck here in Mantle of the Ancients. That's going to bring back all their equipments and make Danith a huge lethal threat. So they're pretty sure that we can't do anything about this. And they swing at us, but they try to blow up Tifa with Argentum armor. But we have a great play. We tap Gwenna and activate Zapandrel, sacrificing our Kogla and our Protean Hulk. That's going to let us search up a Bane of Progress from our library. And they have a Lauren's Escape to save their commander's play, but that's going to destroy all the other artifacts and enchantments in play, including the monster manual. Tifa gets knocked out, Zapandrel gets a counter, and we survive this combat at 5 life. They follow up with Weathered Wayfarer and a Plains. Tifa untaps, they have a Hushwood Verge, and they recast their commander. Combat triggers happen, but nothing happens because of it. We're going to cast Rush Rebirth on our Bane of Progress, and then saddle up the Gitrog correctly this time. Zapandrel and Halvar trigger, and they don't re-equip the Commander's Plate, so we get to swing for 12, knocking them out and getting a big Gitrog monster trigger. Rush Rebirth is going to grab us a card, but we're going to also put a bunch of lands into play. We get a Shieldred tapped. We want to bolster our life total a bit, and so we cast Vaultborn Tyrant, untapping Gwenna, getting Shieldred trigger, gaining some life. We're going to cast Massacre Worm. This is going to take out their mana dorks and reduce their life total even further while boosting our life total. And so that's just leaving them with a minimum of options on their next turn. They don't have as much mana, and we're going to discard a bunch of cards. On their draw step, Shieldred knocks them down to 2 life. And they elect to go out on their own terms, casting Garruk's Uprising, which means that we win. Thanks, Shieldred.
Game 2 had a valuable lesson, and that lesson was when there is a lethal threat on the board, you can't leave yourself open to it. It's possible that the Cloud player had absolutely nothing, but if I were in their seat, and even if I had absolutely nothing in hand, I would have left that white mana open. That might have been enough of a deterrent to steer the Blightsteel Colossus towards someone who was maybe a little bit more threatening. You know, they had just lost their commander. Yeah, they ramped a bit and they had some equipment on the board, but Danitha was looking a bit scary there. We have a scary commander. If they had kept open some mana, the Blightsteel might have looked someone else's way, but they just left themselves wide open. And I don't blame the Tifa player for taking them out. When you know you can take an opponent out for almost no resources, there's no reason not to. Other than that, this was a game where we had a pretty slow start, and our opponents had some pretty threatening things going early. The play of the game for me was definitely the destroying Protean Hulk into Bane of Progress. I think I inflicted massive psychic damage on my Danitha opponent. It wasn't shown in the editing, but there were several minutes between game actions after that happened when they had declared me dead and targeted Tifa with the Argentum armor. Other than that, I'm once again really impressed with Shieldred with that life gain. Same with Vaultborn Tyrant. I actually didn't mention that after game 1, but all of that life gain really adds up, and I might want to find some more ways to do that. In terms of other things that impress me, I sort of mentioned it there, but I think that Rushed Rebirth has just a ton of play in a deck like this, and I really want to, find more ways to accent it. We'll get into that more in the afterward. This was also a game where we got to see Zapandrel in action, and I think that card and Untamed Growth are just really incredible in a deck like this. Just doubling the amount of value you get out of the Gitrog monster can be so huge. Drawing 12 cards and putting 12 lands into play on average with what's going on in this deck is incredibly powerful at any turn in the game and can really build you back out of nowhere with just 2 cards from you, your commander, and whatever you're sacrificing. It wasn't quite the best showcase for it, but I think Gwenna did a great job and showed how powerful this card can be. Just untapping 3 times just accelerates you so much, and it's impressive because we had a ton of lands in play and it still felt like a lot of mana, and it still enabled us to move forward. So, final thoughts for today.
The first is that I would like to really find more ways to support Rush Rebirth and Protean Hulk. There's another card called Reincarnation that does something similar, and I enjoy this idea of having a toolbox of cards when we sacrifice. So I'd like to squeeze in a few more ways to sacrifice creatures, a few more cards that do that effect, and then massage the overall inclusion of creatures that we have so that we get a diverse list of sort of silver bullets for different situations, so that when we find ourselves facing down something seemingly insurmountable, we will often have what we need to get through it. Something like a creature that fogs could, completely save our bacon, or something that makes someone sacrifice a creature. There's a lot of different effects that can be put on enters the battlefield mostly, but also some dies. So we can do some exploring to see and build some of that into our removal suite and maybe swap out some of our other cards that can perform as well. I would actually like to look at the protection category to find some of that room. I didn't have access to them when I was sacrificing creatures, but I never felt like, man, I really wish I had a feigned death right now. It felt like it was going to be a little bit win more often. It's not doing anything for us other than setting us up again for next turn, and the Gitrog inherently sets you up for the next turn if things are going right. And if things are going wrong, this isn't going to help you that much. I would like to restructure our ramp package a bit. I think that the cards that seek out lands should just be creatures. Even having a 1/1 elf or a 2/2 mana dork of some kind could be really incredible when the Gitrog monster comes down. If we have a hand that isn't that great, this can let us, feed a mana dork into the Gitrog monster to get some card draw, maybe replace itself with a land drop. Finally, I'd like to address our game changers. I wasn't in love with the idea of including double tutor, and one of the things I really like about Commander is that the games are not too samey, even if you play the deck multiple times. And what I really like about this deck is that you're going to get to see a huge chunk of your deck being able to go and find Cabal coffers every time, or find that board wipe exactly when you need it, as opposed to this tension where you need to connect with the Gitrog monster or set something up to find what you need. Feels really valuable to me. I know it seems a little counterintuitive to what I just said, but one of the cards that I'd like to get in after this, once I have some mana dorks and creature to sacrifice, is Natural Order. It is a tutor, but it's a restricted tutor, and the way that it's going to play out, it's really only going to shove our board forward for the most part, rather than potentially just be the Swiss Army knife that isn't very interesting. And so I'd love to get Natural Order in, and we may look at modifying the creatures that we have available to us to make the most of that. I was pretty impressed with the Ancient Tomb. That's definitely staying. And then taking a look at what other game changers we might be interested in. I think that I would like to move both of these tutors out and find something else. So I will be thinking about a third game changer, maybe even just something as simple as a Chromox for a little bit more acceleration, or maybe once our creature count is higher, a Gaia's Cradle. We'll see. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and most importantly of all, comment. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear about gameplay. Feel free to pitch ideas for commanders you'd like to see on this channel. You can find me on social media. That's up on the screen and in the description. Until next time, Magic Boy out.